Welcome to the Brave Woman Podcast. I'm your host, Tanya Lynn, founder of Sistership Circle and author of Open Your Heart and The Art of Leading Circle. I'm the mother of 2 girls, an 8 on the Enneagram, aka the Challenger, happily married to my business partner, Brent, love connecting with nature, and have put in well over 10,000 hours circling with other women. On this podcast, we will explore how to embody the brave woman so that you can take action on your dreams and desires, unapologetically speak your truth, and live life on your own terms. Grab a seat and a cup of tea, and let's get started. Welcome back to our red tent, where we are in this deep dive immersion into our heroine's journey, where first we looked at the split with the feminine, and then we moved into the surrender and the receiving of support, the receiving of the medicine from our sisters. And now we are moving into healing the masculine within ourselves and our relationship with the masculine, with the men in our lives. And where we're moving towards is sacred union, the integration of masculine and feminine within ourselves to really step into our wholeness as brave, spiritual, feminine leaders in the world. And this piece today of talking about the masculine is so important. And we could probably hang out here for an entire season. So I'm really feeling that the next season, bringing in some conscious men, really diving into this, because I think it is such an important piece and something that perhaps we don't talk so much about here at Sistership Circle, because we're doing so much work with the feminine. But one thing that we hold as a core value within our organization is this integration of masculine and feminine. That circle needs the masculine, that we need to cultivate the masculine strengths and superpowers within ourselves, and that it's not about blaming men. It's not about blaming the masculine. It's really understanding this difference between the wounded, toxic masculine and the divine masculine. And so what is that? Let's actually start there in this conversation. So the wounded, toxic masculine, we can look at as the way in which the masculine has come about and how it is expressed in our patriarchal culture. So what I mean by that is that this patriarchal culture is based on domination, control, suppression, competition, and that really it is creating scarcity. It's a paradigm that's based on scarcity. When we start to understand that, we can see how the masculine will overcompensate, coming from that place of not enough. I'm not enough. There's not enough resources. There's not enough anything. It's not in the paradigm of we live in this abundant world where all of our needs are met. No. There's limited, finite resources. And so therefore we must be in competition with one another to make sure that we get enough. And we must be in this dominator role, where we are trying to assert our power over others, suppressing others, so that we can make sure that, again, that we have what we need, that we are taken care of. So within this paradigm, there is very little trust, and there's not much of a connection with source, God, goddess, right? So that is that suppression of the goddess energy and the focus on God outside of ourselves. This is not a presence within ourselves. This is not a power that we are connected to. It is outside of ourselves, making us less than. You could kind of see how this works, right? So the way in which men then are trained in this culture is to fight, to compete, to dominate, to control. And women who then are wanting to find their place in this society then develop those toxic masculine qualities themselves. So this is where the heroine's journey really comes into place, because most women who are capable, succeeding, climbing the corporate ladder, trying to find their place in the world, that came from the feminist movement of the 50s, 60s, 70s, that was all about having women find their place, find equality. But what women took on was being masculine in a very wounded and toxic way. That is what we are unraveling, and that is what we are discovering as we are on this heroine's journey, right? For me to step into heroine, not hero, I'm now doing this surrender, this descent, and starting to unravel these patterns and the way in which I thought that I needed to show up in order to be someone in this world. So we push hard, we force, we penetrate, we are focused on, proving ourselves worthy, coming from that paradigm of not enough scarcity. So there's two different parts of this conversation. The first is, where can I heal that wounded masculine within myself? And the second part is, how do I come into right relationship with the men in my life, that I am no longer coming from the paradigm of wounded masculine, but I'm actually helping to create more of the divine masculine within the men in my life. So if I'm doing this healing work and I am cultivating the divine masculine within myself, then as a reflection of that work, I'm helping to heal the men in my life. They are then starting to mirror my energy, and they are actually going to shift the way in which they show up. Let me say that again. This is a big one. If there's one thing I think we need to get, is that we have the power. You have the power to shift those around you. So if you are in the blame state of, there's something wrong with these men, I only attract bad men, all the men are assholes, they're all bad, they're all wrong, they're all toxic, I'm surrounded by the toxic masculine, and that's all that's showing up, that is a reflection of you. So don't shoot the messenger, get the message. In other words, stop focusing on the men in your life and start focusing on healing this piece within you. For you to come into cultivating your divine masculine within yourself, as well as healing your father wound. There might be a happening, because it's like, we really don't want to go there. Now, we were either in one of two places with our fathers. Let's just get right in, going right in. We either had a very toxic father who really either wasn't there, didn't show up, or just was a jerk, or we actually had a really great man as our fathers, and we were our father's daughter, and we put him on a pedestal. But we still learned a behavior of trying to be patriarchy's daughter. And so it's still not divine masculine. Let me give you an example. My dad is the most generous, loving, sweet man. I was father's daughter for sure. I was daddy's little girl. He coached my sports team. You know, it's like he wanted me to strive, and I did. I strived, and I wanted to be the best that I could be. And I really looked up to my dad. My dad was a dentist. He had a very successful dental practice. I worked at his office. Like, I was doing all the things to really, really make sure that I was a good patriarchal daughter. And I was completely disconnected from God, from trusting in a higher power, because what happens in that paradigm is that I bowed down to the God of hard work. That's what my dad did. That's what I learned. I learned to deify, if that's a word, to put on high, to put on a pedestal, the God of hard work. I have to work hard to succeed. And I became very good at that. And I drove my body into the ground. Hashimoto's, thyroid, burnout, exhaustion, you name it. This body took a beating from all the sports that I was playing, from the exhaustion, from trying to be perfect with my grades. I was sick so much as a child. Sophomore year of high school, I was pretty much taken out. I had mononucleosis, and I then was on Accutane. If any of you had really bad acne, to clear up my acne, it completely leveled me. And I remember crying at night saying, I am sick of being sick. I could barely participate in my sophomore year because I was constantly ill. And I suffered from a lot of illness as a child in high school. Finally had to start addressing this piece as I went into my 20s and 30s. Now I don't get sick anymore. That was something that I learned from my father, because actually my grandfather, my dad's dad, was a boxer. Talk about learning how to work hard. He used his body as a punching bag for a living. So what did my dad learn? That he had to work himself to death. My dad has now his spine's all messed up. He's got two, he had shoulder replacements, hip replacements. My dad's the bionic man now because he worked so hard. I learned that there was no trust in a higher power. There was no connection with the divine masculine. We looked for the God of hard work. That is the only way we're going to get what we want, we'll get what we need, succeed in the world, is work hard. So most of us who grew up as daddy's little girls, as patriarchy's daughter, learned that. And it's toxic because it is not putting any faith or trust in a power higher than ourselves. And there's an emotional disconnection that's happening. So a lot of those of us who develop this pattern learned aggressive behavior, because you got to muscle through, and also a rigid pattern of follow the rules, get it right, get perfect grades, right? So that was my worth. My worth was tied to that perfection, to the getting it right. And as a result of that rigidity, vulnerability was a huge weakness. So there's very little emotional connection. It was a constant cover up the emotions. Don't be emotional. Don't feel. And so that's the sickness. That's the injuries in the body, is that emotional disconnection. the emotional unavailability. So what did I do? Attracted men in my life who are emotionally unavailable. Does this sound familiar? Part of our reconditioning and our surrender is into vulnerability, is into the mess. It's to feel our feelings fully feeling these feelings, because the feminine is emotional. It's a superpower of the feminine, is the ability to emote, to feel, the empathy, right? So this is a really important piece, because in doing the father healing, you got to get, this is not personal to your father. He was a good man and he learned how to play the patriarchal game and he was successful. But you still learn this conditioning that you have to unravel. So it's not about dad. This is not personal. Let dad off the hook. And that was the work that I had to do with my own father. Was I had a really hard time getting mad because I thought, he's done nothing wrong. My dad's a rock star. He's amazing. God, I am so grateful for all that I was given. I lived in white, patriarchal, suburban privilege. Like, thank you, Dad, right? But there's a piece of where I'm covering up for him. And I'm not actually allowing myself to do the work of unraveling these patterns and allowing myself to actually get mad about this. And this is where we get caught. This is the trap. When we have good fathers, we then want to protect them. But the work here is not about them at all. Put dad to the side. He learned from his father, who learned from his father, who all the way up the line have learned this pattern that is not serving us, that is not integrated, and that honestly is still disrespecting the feminine. So for us to come back into the sacred union, into integration of masculine and feminine, we must cut that off. We must let go of the God of hard work. Now, this doesn't mean you can never work hard again, but that we have to let go of the God of hard work as our savior. That is the only way. We have to stop this pattern of literally killing ourselves. The exhaustion, the burnout, the pushing through, the muscling, and not trusting. So there's some unraveling here. And there's some anger that needs to be felt into. And it's not to be directed at dad. It's to be directed at the patriarchal conditioning of where men were taught to be this way and teach their daughters to do this. There's a distinction here. This is not about making dad wrong. This is about being able to use your sword, I was going to say shield, but your sword to cut through this because it is holding you hostage. It is keeping us disconnected and split from the feminine. So there's a piece where we have to tap into and surrender to our sacred rage. For us to have our full emotional capacity, for us to feel all of it, for us to come into full presence. Now that is the divine masculine here, and I'll get to that in a second. We must play the full range of our emotions and going into that sacred rage, into the fire, and cutting ourselves loose, cutting the chains that have kept us hostage to the God of hard work, versus surrendering and trusting in this higher power that will hold us. And this is where like God comes in, right? So there's God and goddess. The God, the sun god, the goddess as the earth goddess, Mama Earth, and Father Sky. This is like spirit and soul. I like to also think of it. So there's like this distinction here between the masculine, the divine masculine as God, as the sun, and then the divine feminine as the moon, as the earth, right? And these different energies that we get to play with. And that's it. It's to play with. It's to cultivate both of these things. The sun god, the honoring of summer, the honoring of the light is equally as important as the honoring of the dark, of the fertile soil, of the moon and that cycle. These are these two very important cycles, dark and light, which is our seasons and our moon cycle. So the sun god, there's this really focused, intentional presence that we get to hold. And this is the piece here that we're wanting, that we're craving from the men in our lives. And I will speak from experience here. All I want is to experience men in their presence, in their grounded power with an erect spine, that connection with the sun god, that full light within their heart space, that they are open and available and present. Well, if we want that, we must learn to develop this presence within ourselves with our emotions, that we can actually be present with our full sacred rage and our full sacred ecstatic joy. That is our work to do. When we can hold and be present with all of that, we can then start creating the space for men to stand in their presence as well, because they have their work to do around their sacred rage. And they also have their work to do around their ecstatic joy, and them being able to feel more versus numbing out with sex, drugs, and alcohol. So numbing out, running away from, avoiding. If we want the men to be present, we have to start being present within ourselves first. And this is a way that we can start to cultivate this divine masculine within ourselves. Men do have the capacity to be in a loving presence as the reflection of the loving presence of the higher power of God. You feel that? So we have been conditioned in our culture to fear God, especially Catholic. That's where I was raised, Catholic religion, fearing God. Say your repentance to God. Own your sins. And then we also have this picture of this almighty God that's this old, perhaps Santa-looking figure, but this man with the white beard. And he's stern. And he might be a little, pointing his finger at you. So if we are wanting to shift into having a relationship with the all-loving presence of God, then we have to release this fear and to start examining our relationship with God and what we were taught. This is also about purpose, and what we may have seen from many of our fathers is not fully be on purpose. And we see this a lot in the generation, the younger generations too, is just this complete loss of what it means to be a man, because all of that was stripped away. The rites of passages into manhood were stripped away. Many men have felt lost about what does that actually mean to be a man on purpose. And that purpose primarily was to provide and protect, to procreate, but then in a higher purpose of what am I here to make a difference for? And it might just be providing for family. And many men failed in this regard, unable to fully show up. And we see a lot of men who were unable to really, truly provide. So there's that piece of where we're striving to be on purpose, to make a difference, right? And to stand in that, to have confidence in ourselves. If we're wanting to really embody that as brave feminine leaders, we have to look at what did we learn from dad around purpose and even around money. That's a big one. A big piece is looking at our relationship with money and what we learned from our fathers around scarcity of money. So we have an opportunity to claim that loving presence within ourselves, to claim our divine purpose on this planet, and to really look at what we learned and unravel those learnings from our fathers. No matter how good of a man they were, right? There's things that we learned. And again, they did nothing wrong. So there's a way in which then we might be able to step into forgiveness. Forgiving Father. Really getting that he was at the mercy of this patriarchal culture, that he really didn't have much of a choice and he really didn't know any better. And by releasing that grip, we can step into our own sovereign power and not look for dad to save us, that we're no longer looking for him to come in and give us that presence that perhaps wasn't there, that emotional availability. Can we let him go in that way and accept him for exactly who he was, who he is, how he learned to be, and allow him to rest in peace? Because it's when we can release dad in that way, we are no longer looking for him to save us on be a knight in shining armor coming up on a white horse. And then what do? We keep looking for a man to do that for us as well. So by first releasing dad and no longer looking for that loving presence from him, and no longer looking for him to provide for us, and no longer looking for him to save us, and stepping into that ourselves of, I am sovereign, I am free, I'm stepping into my own power and my own purpose, I can then start to attract a man who I'm not looking to save me, but I could be in partnership with. And trust me, there are men out there. I know it. There are men who are doing the work just like you. This is something that we have to let go of, believing the old stories and stop to believe that all I see is bad men out there, or weak men, or whatever you want to label them as. And to start to believe that, yes, if I'm doing this work, there is also a man out there doing this work who is for me. What I noticed with my husband is every time that I think that I am growing more than him and that I am going to outgrow him and that he can't keep up with me and he's doing this wrong and he's doing that wrong and therefore he's not for me. As soon as I let go of all of those judgments and I empty out and I surrender, he comes back to me with a breakthrough. he steps into presence. He's just reflecting my own inner work. That is the work. So when I come back into myself, when I can claim back my power, ground myself, sit in my sovereignty, he mirrors that every time. We need to stop looking at the men to be responsible for us and how they provide for us and how they show up for us. Instead, get that we are 100% responsible. And they will just mirror that right back. Every time I'm pointing the finger at him, every time I'm blaming him, and I catch myself and I start looking at where I'm responsible, he's no longer resisting me anymore. And as soon as I stop blaming him, that's when he takes responsibility. It's brilliant. And I just want him to take responsibility, but it's like, wait, what about me? Where am I not taking responsibility? Where is he mirroring my father wound or mirroring the wounded patriarchy that I'm blaming and making wrong? No, let the patriarchy go. Let the father go. Let the men go. Step into your sovereignty. So men, it is part of their nature to conceal. It is a woman's nature to reveal. Starting to understand this, a man's nature is to conceal. And this is a war tactic. This is if a man is the one out hunting, he can't just be like, hey, bear, I'm here, or here, deer, right? No, you have to conceal yourself. If you're hunting, we were gatherers, right? As a hunter, you have to conceal yourself. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to catch the deer. If you are in war and you're not concealing yourself, you're going to lose the war. So it is built within our men. This is passed down to conceal themselves, to conceal their feelings, to conceal what they're thinking, to not be vulnerable. This is the training around vulnerability is weak because it could have gotten men killed. We have learned this. So there's an unraveling here of us trusting that vulnerability actually is our strength because it creates the connection that we're craving. It's the opening of the heart. It's the revealing. And this is the flower. The flower must open its petals, those brilliant, beautiful, vibrant colored petals, so that the bee can come. So that is our job as women, is to learn how to untangle, unravel the concealing and start to open up and reveal ourselves. And that is when we come into our power. That requires surrender. So the other piece here is around the container. Cup. This container for this tea, we could say that the container is the masculine. Inside, the water is the feminine. If I pour the tea out, what happens? It just seeps all over the place. It's into the ground. It's gone. So we need a container. It's like a flag and a flag pole. We need to be tethered. We need a container. This is a very valuable part of the masculine. Sometimes we just want to be seeping all over the place. We want to be the flag that just is free, right? We just want to be in the feminine, and we don't honor the container, the boundaries of the container. We don't honor the flagpole, the tethering, the groundingness. We don't honor the structure. We just want to be free flowing. But this is the integration of masculine and feminine within yourself, is honoring of both. The seeing that inside of this cup, inside of this container, the water is still able to move. It's still free. It's still able to be expressed. That there's nothing wrong with structure. There's nothing wrong with a container. There's nothing wrong with being tethered. Can we find our way within that? Can we allow ourselves to be fully self-expressed and actually see that it's creating some safety for us to be free? It's kind of like a wedding ring. This ring is a container for my marriage. Can I feel the safety within that and find the full self-expression of me inside of that container? And part of that is the sacredness that's created within. So this body of yours is a container. It's structure, and it is allowing you to be your soul's expression in the world. The containers that you build around you create sacredness, create sacred, safe space for you to do your work, to be you. This is a way too that in honoring the container, the masculine container, the masculine structure, the boundaries, that we can thrive inside of these things. And I think that is a really, really important piece. So there is a way in which we can come into union within ourselves with the honoring of the masculine and the feminine. And it's first by really, truly healing the wounded masculine, honoring the divine masculine, coming into that power ourselves and starting to shift our relationship with the men in our lives. And so next week, that's where we're going to go, is more into this integration into the sacred union.
You just listened to this show. I'd love for you to leave the Brave Woman podcast an honest review. Reviews help podcasts like this one grow, making it more possible for me to devote my time, energy, and money to its production. If you take a screenshot of your review and email it to support@sistershipcircle.com, we'll send you one of our archetype activations as a thank you gift. Thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it.
Up next, as you are descending into the abyss, it's in the mystery where you meet the goddess. Are you ready to receive her support? What does that look like? Find out in the next episode.